So if you think about setting up private practice, obviously CQC is at the very front of your mind. And in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to cover 5 key areas. How much does it cost? How long is it going to take you to apply for it? Who has to apply? What are the exemption criteria? And then finally, get some help. So brought back Dr. Matthew Wickham, who runs regular webinars to talk us through these 5 key areas. So I'm going to be quiet and hand over to you, Matthew.
Thanks very much, Dave. So I do a regular webinar, and CQC registration must be one of the biggest topics that we have. Regulation is something that we need to talk about for private healthcare. The biggest sort of obvious thing is that it's different in different parts of the UK. So there's a regulator for England, that's the CQC, but there is actually separate regulators for Scotland, for Wales and Northern Ireland. Common question comes up is how much does it actually cost to register as a new private provider? The simple answer is it depends on what you're going to actually do as that provider. So if you're just starting out as a sole provider in one space, then the cost is much smaller than if you're setting up a big polyclinic, for example. That kind of makes sense. If you're going to do more things, you need to be more heavily sort of regulated in terms of your procedures. But in terms of how much it costs, there is a fee calculator on the CQC website, and we'll put a link in at the bottom. Just under £1,900 for the year. So the actual application doesn't cost anything, but you do have to pay that first year's registration fee.
So so nothing for the application, but you've got this 1,900 minimum cost, assuming it's just you going solo, basically. But it could be, they'll calculate it depending on how big your clinic is. So if you've got a whole load of other doctors, A&Ps working with you, then suddenly your costs are going to explode. I think the big question of who has to apply, and I think others who have seen you in our previous video talking about private practice, that you sort of originally were working on under someone else's CQC registration. Is that right? Can we sort of flesh that out a bit more?
Yeah. So in Scotland, it's the HIS, so slightly different acronym. But yes, you can work under somebody else's registration. So, for example, anybody you employ in your practice is working under the practice or your registration because you're the owner of the practice. The reality is that it doesn't matter what you're going to do. If you're going to work in person and see patients face to face, or if you're going to work online solely and provide consultation information over a video screen or the telephone, that is all regulated practice within the CQC.
Sure.
So you have to be regulated. It doesn't matter if you're seeing the patient physically or just online. And that's a very key thing to be clear about. That's something, again, that comes up time and time again in the webinar. And if you are working as a GP on the performers list for the NHS, then you can actually take advantage of something called the exemptions. And you can have practicing privileges, which means that I can go along to a private provider and work under their in HIS in Scotland or CQC registration in England. And that basically allows me to work with practicing privileges. So I'm technically renting a space, but I don't have to apply separately for my own registration to work in that space.
Makes sense. So you've got a space that's already pre-regulated that you then, instead of you having to go through what sounds like quite expensive process of CQC or HIS, as I know you're working up in Scotland, so you can then sort of almost dovetail into someone else's clinic or clinical space, really, because you're not seeing the same patients, to sort of try and at least ease the burden, ease the cost, and sort of help each other out. I take it from that aspect.
And the biggest advantage is you haven't had to wait for the application time.
Right. Okay. Which I think probably leads on to the next point of how long is this all going to cost or take? Sorry, the sort of cost in time.
So the cost in time is probably much higher than the actual cost of your regulatory fee. So the CQC, the last conversation I had with one of my colleagues who's an expert in CQC applications, was saying it's somewhere between 6 and 9 months.
Wow. Okay.
6 and 9 months is all the time that you cannot actually see a patient and do regulated activities, basically consult a GP or a doctor. So if you're setting up somewhere new, that's a huge lag time between getting a premises, getting it all set up, and actually being able to open your door and see a patient. You do have that lag time. So you've got to factor these costs in. Cost of time, massive.
So you've got potentially up to a significant, like 3/4 of your financial year where you're not gaining anything. You've got to, I take it, you've got to have all your equipment ready, good to go, because that's, you're saying to CQC you're happy. You've got to have the premises set up. So you've either bought it yourself and done it up to a healthcare professional standard, or you're forking out rent to a property which, everyone's watched Homes Under the Hammer. They're going to bump it up because now you're in a specific, not just a business setting, but a specific healthcare business setting. So they're going to clearly want to charge a premium for all that. And unless you've got to be really careful then with your finances, that you're just going to lose money for 9 months until you can see your first patient. And then, when we interviewed about your setting up your private practice before, when you start, it's unlikely, unless you're incredibly lucky or good at the marketing, that you're going to start with a full clinic.
Yeah, basically. There's the costs of setup are ramped up just purely on the fact that you've got a lot of time before you can actually start, if you're doing your full registration yourself. Now, of course, if you were doing an online business, that would be slightly different, because you wouldn't necessarily have to pay for rent and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah.
So there are ways of getting around that, and you could, in theory, edit your registration later on down the line. But that's probably an entirely separate YouTube kind of conversation for us.
Sort of going from online to in-person. Okay, so potential big can of worms from that point. But I think you then raise a good point. Then you can't really, because I take it then it'll become a probity issue if you're not careful, because you're saying to the CQC, actually, I'm working online, so doing, video consults or whatever, but then you change it because you then think that you could game the system by getting rid of that 9-month or potentially that 9-month lag from that way. Okay.
Oh, there's a whole other issue, and that assumes that you filled in all the forms correctly.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that they haven't sent the forms back, and after a couple of months said, no, you haven't done this, can you clarify that? And then you go back to the start, and it's another 6 to 9 months.
Wow.
So you really have to be quite clear about getting it right, and getting it right on the first go. And the best analogy I can give that's even close to this is applying for a mortgage. Anybody who's ever applied for a mortgage, if you've written all the forms out yourself, you know how hard work that was. Anybody who's applied for every other mortgage after the first one that they tried probably used a broker, because
definitely
there's a
I
value
did.
in getting there's a value in getting someone who fills in these forms every day of the week to know how to get it through the other side. So that in itself is a huge potential banana skin, is that even if you don't quite fill the form in correctly, you might end up taking even longer just to actually get through the process.
Crumbs. I mean, I've just moved house in the past month. And I went through, in fairness, Medic's Money and used their mortgage advisor, and they're phenomenal. So separate video on that one. I'm going to do a deep dive. So I take it then there must be then CQC, I've sat in on some of your webinars, not that I'm just out of curiosity, because it's something that seems to, on the Facebook forum, seems to always crop up. You've clearly used one. Who did you use? And because they were there talking and they seemed incredibly knowledgeable on it.
So after the first, I think it was 2 webinars, when I got a ton of questions about CQC registration and realised I didn't actually know enough about this, I pretty much interviewed a bunch of different CQC consultants.
Okay.
It was the obvious thing to do. I had loads of time to think about this and thought, well, actually, let's find some people who actually know the answer to these questions. Turns out, like anything, you can get a range of answers and a range of different products that people will package up and sell. So there's some people who charge very little, some people who charge way over the top, and there's people mostly in the middle doing a really solid job. So there's 2 chaps called Dan and Paul who are from the UK Care Consultants, And I have to say, they've been absolutely excellent. They come along to the webinar. They give an hour of their time every month to help answer these questions about CQC. And yeah, they are super knowledgeable, depending on even the minutiae of the detail that you're trying to get hold of for your clinic. And yes, you can come to the webinar for free, as you did. But they do charge for their service, and I think they charge somewhere around 2,250, if my memory serves me correctly, plus VAT. So you get a bit of a discount if you say you came through Doc Support, so that's a win.
So please do.
Yeah. So
you say we sent you. So
yeah, if you say that we sent you, then they'll take 125 quid off. But they're quite happy to answer questions directly and give some specific advice and help people through it. And they can do that for anybody at any stage through their CQC process or journey.
So no, I think that's enlightening from that way. So we've sort of quickly rattled through sort of the 5 very quick steps. Again, Matthew, you've done above and beyond, and we've got an ebook all about CQC. So if you want to have a deeper dive in that, I will leave some links below on that one. Keep an eye. I would jump onto LinkedIn, follow Matthew on LinkedIn, because he will often post about the CQC, as we've sort of talked about. These are regular evening webinars, which are an hour. So they normally talk for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then there's ample time to ask your questions. So if you're in that grey area, you just want to dip your toe in, but you're not quite sure, tap onto one of those. So if you're ready to sort of jump in, get across to the UK Care Consultants, tell them that Doc Support sent you, you get a discount, we get a little bit of money as a referral fee, so we can keep this channel running and keep the website going and keep the lights on, and then everyone's happy. So you've got a range of options there. So I've been Dr. Dave Highmarsh. It's been Dr. Matthew Wickham. This is Doc Support.